June 1816. Vermont, snow. 12 inches of it, falling on sheep that should be grazing knee-high grass. The farmer watching them die does not know that a mountain exploded 14 months ago on the other side of the planet. He does not know that 160 million tons of sulfur are suspended 43 kilometers above his head, turning the atmosphere into a refrigeration system. He only knows that it is summer, and his animals are freezing. This is how a volcano in Indonesia killed hundreds of thousands of people who never heard the explosion. Let me show you the mechanism. How sulfate aerosols transformed the sky into a weapon. The execution. How crops were liquefied from the inside by a biological contradiction. And the cascade. How a single temperature drop mutated a bacterium and launched the first global cholera pandemic. But the strangest consequence was not the famine. It was what emerged from the darkness. Go back to April 4th, 1815. The island of Sumbawa, a distinct civilization, lives on the slopes of Mount Tambora. They speak a language unrelated to any other in the region. They have their own tools, burial rites, and seasonal rituals. The harvest has been exceptional. Within 24 hours, they will cease to exist. The eruption began on April 5th. By April 10th, the mountain had ejected 100 cubic kilometers of material, enough to bury the entire island of Manhattan under a layer of ash 1.6 kilometers deep. The energy release was 33,000 megatons of TNT, 2.2 million times the power of the Hiroshima bomb. The eruption was heard 2,600 kilometers away. The shock wave circled the globe multiple times. But the explosion was not the weapon. The weapon was invisible. It was already rising through the stratosphere, spreading across the northern hemisphere through a circulation pattern that would take 6 months to complete. The planet had been poisoned. It simply had not noticed yet. Here is what happened in the atmosphere. Volcanic eruptions inject sulfur dioxide gas into the air. Normally, this is a short-lived irritant. It reacts with water vapor and precipitates as acid rain within weeks. Tambora was different. The eruption column was so violent that it punched through the troposphere and deposited its payload directly into the stratosphere, above the weather, above the rain, where there is no mechanism to wash it out. There the sulfur dioxide reacted with ambient moisture to form sulfuric acid aerosols, microscopic droplets, each one approximately 0.5 micrometers in diameter. This size is not random. It is thermodynamically optimized for destruction. At 0.5 micrometers, these particles scatter incoming short-wave solar radiation, the visible light that warms the Earth, while remaining transparent to outgoing heat. The planet was losing energy faster than it could absorb it. The technical term is sulfate aerosol forcing. The practical result is global refrigeration. By late 1815, astronomers across Europe were documenting anomalies. The sunsets had changed. Lurid, blood red. Violent streaks of purple that persisted long after dusk. A dry fog hung across the sky that would not disperse with wind and could not be washed away by rain, because it was not in the lower atmosphere. It was 40 kilometers above their heads, and it would persist for 24 months. They noted the strange colors in their journals. Then they moved on. They could not have understood. The science did not exist yet. Now we move to the killing mechanism itself. Plants do not simply grow, they calibrate. They use two independent signals: photoperiod, the length of the day, and temperature. Photoperiod tells the plant when to grow. Temperature tells the plant that it is safe. In a normal summer, these signals are synchronized. Long days mean warm temperatures. The plant activates its growth pathways. In 1816, these signals were decoupled. The days were long. July in Vermont has nearly 15 hours of daylight. The plant's internal clock was screaming, "Grow, now." But the temperatures were falling. The stratospheric veil had destabilized the jet stream. A massive blocking pattern locked Arctic air over North America and Western Europe. What we now call a polar vortex had descended on the growing season. June 6, 1816. 12 inches of snow in New England. July 4th. Ice forming on lakes as far south as Pennsylvania. The crops were caught in a biological contradiction. Their clocks said summer. The air said winter. When tissue temperatures drop below zero, water inside plant cells begins to freeze. Ice crystals nucleate in the intracellular fluid. As they expand, they rupture the cell walls from the inside. The technical term is intracellular ice nucleation. The practical result is that an entire field of wheat liquefies overnight. But not all crops died equally. Corn is a C4 plant, optimized for high temperatures. Its photosynthetic enzymes cease functioning in cold shock. The corn belt of New England was eliminated in days. Wheat is a C3 plant, more tolerant, but only marginally. The wheat belt of Western Europe collapsed. Oats in England surged from 25 shillings to 92 shillings per quarter, a 268% price increase in 12 months. The worst famine of the 19th century had begun. By August, a second wave of destruction was underway. Farmers replanted emergency crops after the June frosts. A killing frost in August destroyed those too, but the cold was only the first domino. As grain prices soared, horses became unaffordable. The animals that powered 19th century transportation were starved or slaughtered for meat. The infrastructure of movement collapsed. In this biological vacancy, a German inventor named Carl von Drais designed a replacement, a two-wheeled human-powered vehicle. The Laufmaschine, the precursor to the bicycle. The year without a summer invented personal transportation. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, relentless rain trapped a group of English tourists indoors, among them Mary Shelley and Lord Byron. Unable to go outside, they held a ghost story contest. Shelley began writing. The result was Frankenstein, a novel about scientific hubris and the darkness at the edges of the natural world. The same contest produced The Vampire, the first modern vampire story. The Year Without a Summer invented science fiction and Gothic horror. But the most devastating cascade was biological. The cooling of the Indian Ocean disrupted monsoon patterns in the Bay of Bengal. Altered water temperatures and salinity created new selective pressures on bacterial populations in the littoral zone. Vibrio cholerae, a waterborne pathogen endemic to South Asia for centuries, mutated. A more virulent strain emerged from the disrupted ecosystem. By 1817, it had hitched a ride on British troop movements. The first global cholera pandemic had begun. The volcano killed 92,000 people immediately on Sumbawa and Lombok. It killed hundreds of thousands more with cold and famine across Europe and North America. And then it killed hundreds of thousands more with a disease that might never have evolved without the atmospheric forcing that destabilized an ocean's thermal regime. The forensic proof of Tambora is now preserved in ice. Scientists analyzing cores extracted from Greenland and Antarctica identified a massive sulfur spike in the strata corresponding to 1815. The ice remembered what the atmosphere had forgotten. Sir Stamford Raffles, the British lieutenant governor of Java, had documented the immediate aftermath, the darkness. The pyroclastic surge hitting coastal villages at 700 degrees Celsius and 160 kilometers per hour. The refugees and carbonized bodies. Modern archaeology has since excavated what scientists call the Pompeii of the East, the lost kingdom of Tambora, an entire culture and language deleted in ours. The bodies were found frozen in postures of daily life, still holding brass bowls, still wearing jewelry. They had no warning. The volcanic explosivity index rates Tambora as a VI7 event, the largest eruption in at least 1,300 years. Since the mysterious climate catastrophe of 536 A.D., and here is the fact that matters now, The Earth averages one VEI-7 eruption approximately every 1,000 years. We are statistically overdue. The farmer in Vermont burned his fences to warm his sheep. They died anyway. He could not have understood. The connection between a caldera in Indonesia and a pasture in New England was untraceable. The science did not exist. 2 centuries later, we understand the mechanism. We can trace the sulfur. We can model the cooling. We can predict the photoperiod temperature decoupling that will liquefy crops in fields halfway around the world. We understand everything about the Tambora event, except how to stop the next one. The sulfur is still in the rock. The stratospheric circulation still operates. The aerosol physics have not changed. And somewhere beneath the surface, a magma chamber is filling, building pressure against a thinning crust. The 536 AD event that preceded Tambora by 13 centuries did not just cool the climate. It collapsed empires, triggered mass migrations. Scholars now believe it contributed to the fall of Rome itself. That eruption was never identified. The mountain that ended the ancient world is still out there, still active, and that mystery is far darker than anything that happened in 1816.